Hello, everyone. My name is Frédéric Cardin. Welcome to an interview with Panem 360. I'm very glad to receive today to welcome Sahara von Hattenberger. What a great name she has. I always say that. I love that name. Sahara von Hattenberger, which is a bright and brilliant young cellist, who is originally from Vancouver, now lives mostly between Montreal and New York City, and she's about to release a brand new album on October 18. It's called 1Q84. There's a whole lot of meaning and crisscrossings of references behind this title, and so she's gonna talk about that right now. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm very glad. I'm very glad you are here. Sarah, so um you're a cellist. If people want to know you a bit more, there's another interview on Pan 360 which has been done a few weeks ago. It's about the duo you are running with a soprano, which is a very original chamber ensemble, very original formation, cello and soprano. It's called Duo Étrange or Strange Duo. And well, anyway, you talk about yourself a bit more in this interview, so I encourage and um, I suggest people to go see that interview. I'll put the link in underneath here.
Awesome.
But for now, we will talk about this new album, which is called 1Q84. So what is it about? Why this title? Maybe people already know, but
Well, it is a reference to the book by Haruki Murakami.
Mhm.
He wrote a book called 1Q84, and it's basically a surrealist novel that takes place in 1984, but the protagonist kind of gets trapped in this parallel universe, and she calls that parallel universe 1Q84 because in Japanese, Q means nine. So it's sort of a Japanese play on
1984.
words. And I lived in Japan for a year, so that's
Oh,
something that's really close to my heart. But why 1984? It's because the first half of the album, because it's double disc, is the Claude Bolling suite for cello and jazz piano trio. And that was composed in 1984. And it's very odd because when you think of music composed in the 80s, you don't generally think of that genre of sort of neoclassical, jazz classical fusion.
yeah.
And it's you think more John Zorn and stuff like that. You think edgy, maybe electronic music, experimental music, but that's not at all what the Claude Bolling was. It was sort of this very joyful piece that was more reminiscent of the 60s and 70s because that was kind of Claude Bolling's era. But what's great about it is it's kind of I think of it as an antidote to the angst that people were going through in the 80s. And because it's 2024, I wanted to sort of commemorate that by re-recording the Bolling because it hasn't been re-recorded very much. And so I also added like other references to 1984, like I did a cover on the album that's been recomposed of Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush. Yes, it did come out in 1985, but Kate Bush wrote it in 1984. So that's the title of the album. It's a bit circumvoluted.
Yeah, well, we can take a bit of freedom with the reality. It's an artist thing. You can do it. And besides, as you said, it was written in 1984. So it's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's other original compositions on the album. We'll talk about it, but let's go back to the suite by Claude Bolling, which is a very substantial piece of music. It's about an hour long in six separate movements, each of them titled um, in reference to a Baroque or it's classical music, or some Baroque reference and movements. And so it is so a neoclassical with jazz tinge harmonies and so on. So why is this music important for you? Beside the fact that it fits with 1984, but besides that, did you know about it before? Were you interested in that music for a long time?
Well, I kind of grew up with the piece because my father is a Frenchman from France, and he he really liked Claude Bolling's music, and he used to play it for me when I was a kid. And when I was at McGill, I did it for my bachelor's degree recital. And actually, I got threatened from the department. They said, "You're not allowed to have drums in a classical music recital. Like we're gonna fail you." But they didn't in the end. I got an A. But it's been a piece that I've played a lot, and I've performed it a lot, and I felt I had something to say on it, something different to say. And one of those things would be the fact that the rhythm section in the original recording really doesn't get any chance to shine. So we worked a lot with Jim and Adrian, and I gave them a lot of liberties to, not only take solos, we add jazz solos that are not in the original. Joanne and I recomposed our improvised solos,
Right.
but we also gave them a lot more freedom to play out more, because in the original, they're really just kind of underneath everything, and they don't pack a punch. So we wanted to change a lot of things. But it's interesting, I've gotten so many negative reviews on this album, and none of them are criticizing our playing, but all of them are kind of saying, the jazz reviewers go, "This isn't jazz," and the classical reviewers go, "This isn't classical." And everybody's kind of upset by it, which I think is very interesting. And
Still today, I
it's
mean,
not supposed to be jazz or classical, and it's not
mhm.
supposed to be Mahler either. It's not serious music. This is fun music, but it's still
Yeah,
virtuosic music, and it still takes a lot
it
of
is
effort.
virtuosic. Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's not for the, for the newcomer in the instruments. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
um, so you're talking about improvisation and more liberties. How much was that possible from the score? Was that duly noted everywhere, or was there is there in the score a possibility of, diverging here and there?
Yeah, so in the score, there were no drum or bass solos. So I chose
Mm,
places where I changed the form and then worked on it with Jim and Adrian, and we added those solos. For the piano, Claude Bolling had mostly through composed the whole thing, but he put improvised solos for the piano, one or two in each movement, so quite a lot. And anybody who's re-recorded this, and not many people, I think maybe 3 or 4 people on Spotify have re-recorded this since the original. They just transcribe it. The pianist always plays just a transcription of the original improvisation. But Claude Bolling didn't want that. He wrote improvise. So our pianist recomposed slash improvised all new solos there. And for the cello, he didn't put any improvised solos, but he did put cadenzas. And so in typical classical style, I rewrote my own cadenzas for those.
okay, right, right. You studied with, well, amongst others, Matt Imovitz, which he's great cellist, world
Yes,
renowned here
yeah.
in Montreal. Also, Brian Menker from Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal. Um, but I read that you also had, I don't know if you studied or mentoring from those two guys, they are so great in Montreal. Maybe the two best jazz players in Montreal. I mean, I don't want to start a fight with others, which are very good also. But Jim Doxas at drums and Adrian Vedadi, Mr. Cool at bass. I mean, they're so fantastic. Um, how did you? What exactly is your learning with them? What did you do with them to master the jazz language and jazz gestures and so on?
Well, I've loved jazz for a long time. I think all my friends were jazz musicians back when I was studying at McGill. I wouldn't say that I have mastered the jazz language by any means. I mean, I have a lot of respect for what Jim and Adrian do, and that's just not what I do, right? But what I love about the bowling is it's composed in such a way that it's supposed to bring together musicians from different skill sets. It's supposed to be two jazz musicians and two classical musicians. The piano could be both. I mean, the piano is sort of ambiguous, but the
Mm,
cellist, I mean, he got Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo Ma does not improvise, right?
mm,
But
mm.
Yo-Yo Ma still just does a fantastic job. And I think that's what's interesting about it is this was an opportunity for me to work with these jazz masters that usually wouldn't have ever had. And it was such a special experience. I mean, we also performed it live a few times before we recorded it. And yeah, working with them is just so different. And I think the thing that struck me most about working with them compared to working with classical musicians is that, frankly, they listen better. They anticipate your every move. They are just totally in tune with you in a way that I had never experienced before. And that kind of listening, I think us classical musicians could learn a lot from.
And so what's about the other compositions on the album? What were you looking for specifically, and what can you say about those pieces?
Yeah, so I wanted the second disc on the CD to be a modern take on what you could do with these musicians and these skill sets. And it was hard to find composers actually because there's not many people that are kind of comfortable doing this kind of crossover stuff. So I had to rely on Philippe Cote and Adrian to recommend some people that they knew. Adrian Vidati recommended Malcolm Saylor. I didn't know him at all. He wrote Night Path on the CD, which is the longest commission. It's so groovy. It's so fun. It has so much variation. I really love that piece. And then Philippe Cote, he recommended Remy LeBeouf, and Remy is also very imaginative, and he took a lot of Japanese elements into his composition because he has a relationship with Japan as well. And then Jeffrey is interesting because he's actually a classical composer that I work with for my contemporary classical duo with Duo Étrange. And he wasn't originally supposed to be on the album, but he said, I think I can write something. And I said, really? You've never kind of worked with anything like this before? He was like, no, 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 I think I can write something. And he wrote us this little tune. And I think it was the most challenging one on the album, even though it's only 4 minutes. But it was very fun as well. Very crazy, very modern, extremely difficult.
And there's also running up that hill, that famous song by Kate Bush, which we talked briefly about
Mhm.
earlier. What's your story, your personal story with this song? You're certainly too young to have known it live at the time, but except for the fact that it was written in 1984, is there another story for you with that song?
Well, I was listening to it a lot at the time that I found out I got the grant to be able to do this album.
Okay.
Um, it kind of, for me, really summarizes the angst a lot of us feel right now at this time. I feel like it's relevant again. And I think that's why it was used in that show Stranger Things, which kind of repopularized the tune. Unfortunately, I'm not original. People are always bringing that up and I'm like, "Hey, I listened to Kate Bush before the show used that tune." But yeah, I do think it's very relevant. But another cute little thing is that the famous synthesizer at the beginning of the tune
Mm,
is actually called cello
mm.
on the keyboard. And so that was when I heard that, I was like, that's kind of a cute little
Let's have
coincidence.
the real one do the
Yeah,
job.
let's have the real one exactly.
That's great. Um, you are very eclectic, I think, in your tastes in contemporary classical, traditional classical, jazz, and so on, like we
Thank
talked
you.
about, and probably many other things also. Indie rock, probably, I don't know. Um, but what is there one type of playing a music style that would be the core of your personality, around which everything else revolves, if you had to identify one?
You mean in terms of how I play the cello or in terms
In terms of musical influence and the core of your musical love affair, you know.
mm, well, I like all types of music, like you're saying. I really, really passionately love jazz, but I also passionately love Bach and Beethoven and I also love pop music, that too. For me on the cello, I spent so many years trying to do everything my teacher told me and trying to do it the proper way. And it sounds like people have said this before a lot, but I was only able to really start becoming a better cellist once I actually left school.
Hmm.
And really just get in touch with self-expression on the cello instead of just always trying to do it the right way. Sometimes that can block you when you're like, oh, but is this person going to like how I play? It's like, no, I want to like how I play,
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
And that's like, even though I'm very much strictly a classical musician, like I'm not composing anything, maybe one day, right? This is not whatever, but even just in terms of how you interpret things, instead of interpreting it for somebody else, if you're interpreting it for yourself, I think it becomes a lot more authentic.
Oh, and there's one thing I want to talk about before we end up. The cover, which is beautiful. I really love it. And there's a reference, there's a hint at another famous visual artist, a French one. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, Robert Doisneau. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name
Yes, it
correctly.
is.
Is that
Yeah,
correct?
Robert Doisneau, a famous French photographer.
Yes, yes. And I have always loved his work, not just his book of that cellist, but there's a really cute story behind that. If you read about the cellist that he photographed for the original photo where he's holding his umbrella over the cello.
Yeah, that's a famous picture of an album cover or a cellist, which is I mean
Yes.
in the 1980s or something like that. That fits, and it's a famous cover that Robert Doisneau photographed. So
Yes, he also
yours is a
photographed
bit
that
like that.
famous kiss in Paris.
That's the famous kiss in Paris at the end of the Second World War. That's him also. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And he led kind of a sad life too, that photographer, and that cellist did as well. That cellist was somebody who got rejected from symphony orchestra auditions, but then eventually found his own way with chamber music. And I thought the story of that cellist's career was really relatable for me.
Mm,
So yeah, I don't know. I really like that photo and I
I love
decided to
it. I
recreate it,
love
but
it
make it more
also.
gritty.
Yeah, it was taken. I think I recognized some place in Montreal. Was that it?
Yeah, yeah, it's taken at the Atwater Tunnel.
That's it. The concrete. I don't know what they call it. The concrete things in the street.
And it's got the vines coming
So
down. Those aren't
that's great.
Photoshop, those are real vines.
That's great. The coloring, the lighting is particularly romantic. But there's something gothic about it, of course, in the way you dress for the photo. And I guess some people don't like it, unfortunately. But hey, that's their choice.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
you. Anyway, thank you very much again, Sarah, and see you someday.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.